Hi, welcome to Green Space. I'm Nico. This is a little bit of the wild area on our small-scale farm in the south end of Lusaka. We have about 2.5 acres, and I've kind of been developing it over the last several years along permaculture and agroforestry principles, dividing up areas for different tasks that will benefit us and the wildlife in general, as this area is meant to here. With this kind of series, I want to take on a little bit more of a demonstration role in terms of what we are doing here to live as sustainably and as sufficiently as possible. So I'm going to use this video as a little bit of an introduction to the different areas of the property, and then in the coming weeks we'll talk about how we go through maintaining it. This is about 2.5 acres, so a little bit much just for one person like myself. I do have a few employees that do help with it, and we will be meeting them along the way and seeing how we move and maintain this place throughout the year. So why don't you join me and let's go have a look at the rest of the place. So here behind me we have the domestic vegetable garden. So this space is meant to accommodate our kind of daily need for vegetable greens, some of the longer supplying vegetable fruit producers like peppers and eggplants and tomatoes and things like that. It's in a bit of a sorry state at the moment. We've just come through New Year's. We kind of closed down for a bit. Most of our guys were off, so we need to be getting back to maintaining this as this year goes on. I've also got a few plans in terms of more fencing off this area to keep the dogs out, so we'll be looking at that in the coming weeks. But on the whole, you know, very useful to have, not too far from the house, easy access, and you know, a great resource to cover what our needs are for ourselves and our employees as well. So here we have what we call the market garden. So in contrast to the domestic vegetable garden that we have, this is generally a much larger space. This is approximately a 50 by 30 or so meter area. We have everything lined up on drip irrigation to irrigate it very easily, especially in the dry season. What is winding up at the moment, we had green maize that we've been growing. Green maize is a very popular food in Zambia, either boiled or roasted. So we had that as a crop for sale, but I do double fold with it because then I also use the stalks to feed our goats. It's very useful during the drier times of year, especially towards the end of the dry season, September, October, November, and even into December, that I can at least have green fodder for the goats. So that is now winding up. They're coming out. The lines where they have been removed are now being prepared for the next crop. We have incorporated weeds and organic matter and greens in there. Now they will be left for a few more weeks to die down so that we can actually try and build up the soil within these beds. So we do a mixture of inorganic fertilizers as well as trying as much as possible to build up the soil and reduce our need for the inorganic fertilizers, but we haven't eliminated that entirely at the moment. So we will be planning what kind of goes in here next, so stay tuned and we'll see our process of how we go through what we grow and why we grow it. So right now I'm in one of the goat paddocks. We have about 3 or so of these. I say or so because we have an area that I'm transitioning from being a goat paddock into something else, and I'm going to subdivide another area into a goat paddock. So, but I maintain a few of them so that I have areas that I can cycle the goats through, so that they're not in any one area for too long, because that is really destructive to the plants of that area. We've had the goats for about 10 years or so now. It's been quite a while. They have been very destructive before we put in fencing to keep them contained, but since then it's been generally much easier to look after them, as well as then to make sure they don't get into anything we don't want them to get into, which is the key and most important part of keeping goats. They are for our own consumption. They're just meat goats. We don't milk them or anything like that. And they generally have a very happy life living on green material at this time of year during the rainy season, and then with us supplementing their feed in the dry season, which can be actually a considerable amount of time, and is the most important then around that August, September, October, and November period, when it is usually the height of the dry season. We're getting very high temperatures, and there's very little green growth for them to access. I am in the process of trying to change that in terms of adding things into these crawl areas to allow them to have access to that material, controlled access to that material during the course of the dry season, and we'll be exploring that over the next few weeks as we do more of these videos. So here we are in the full sun orchard. Now in these areas we grow things like mangoes, we grow citrus, we grow lychee. There's a whole host of fruits that we grow in these areas. So it's more of a mixed orchard, and we have to then be certain as to what we are placing where, so that eventually bigger things will not overshadow the smaller trees. This area has certain levels of work need at different times of year. With the rains at the moment, we obviously need to keep the competing grasses and other weeds low, so we've been slashing quite a bit. Then things like fertilizing at this time of year, and in the odd case spraying as well, which we try and avoid as much as possible. These fruits are for our own consumption again, for us and our employees, and we then try and preserve any excess that we do get from them in various different ways. With the citrus, we might make that into orange juice that we can freeze. At this time of year with the mangoes in excess, we then cut and freeze those as well. So we try and make it last as long as possible when we get that glut of produce, which is quite nice. But that said, we then also have an area of shady orchard, and we'll go and see that just now. Just before we leave the orchard area, the full sun orchard area, I forgot to mention one thing, because we do also grow pigeon pea, or Cajanus Cajun, in this area at the moment while the trees are still small, the fruit trees are still small. This allows us to make the best use of the space in between the trees while producing something that we can eat ourselves in terms of the pigeon peas, but then also importantly gives me fodder during a time of year when there's less green material for the goats. So this area, we've been doing that for the last 5 or so years. We've got some older plants like this one here that are from that initial sowing, but we've actually this year also recently re-sowed some seeds to get the next generation going as well, so that we can continually at least have both access to the pigeon peas as well as to the green stems for fodder during that kind of September, October period when they are very useful for the fodder for the goats. And they love it. They absolutely love the stems and the leaves, and if you even give them the pods and the seeds, they'll devour those as well. So here we are in a bit of the shade area of the orchard, and this is where I grow things like coffee. I have, I don't know, about a dozen to 2 dozen trees. They're in a bit of a sorry state right now because they were pruned pretty heavily back following my harvest this year, which turned out to be quite a decent harvest. Again, I grow it for my own consumption, as well as then being able to have, you know, a bit of a unique gift that I can give to friends and family on occasion. They are also on drip irrigation because they do need irrigation into the dry season. And if I'm going to be able to harvest coffee, I need to do that. They're also protected from the goats. Previous to putting up the fences with the goats, they used to come in here and browse the leaves and all sorts of things. It was not very good, and it's taken the coffee a bit of time to recover from that as well. So then, in addition to the coffee in this area, well, you can obviously see the grass is growing pretty rampant at the moment. We've also got things like sweet potato as a ground cover. I'm hoping that we'll be able to grow and spread underneath the trees and provide a bit of barrier against too many weed growth. It also has the added benefit of being edible by us, but also as a fodder crop for the goats during those times of year when I don't have as much green material for them also. And then small amounts of turmeric and ginger that I also grow in this area, as well as a banana circle that we've got just in behind us. That is also on irrigation, and then we'll be able to produce the ladyfinger, the small kind of bananas all year round. So that is currently it in the shade area at the moment, in the shade orchard at the moment, although we are hoping in due course of time to look at what we can develop this area into a bit more of a food forest going forward this next year. So where possible, we are also looking at where we can also grow other fruits and vegetables. And here along the vertical space of one of the courtyard walls of the house, we have passion fruit. So we've actually got quite a good little crop coming up so far. This is the purple passion fruit. We also have the yellow one growing in another area of the property, and the giant passion fruit, which is a new one, and that is now starting to flower and will hopefully start to give us fruits in the next little while. But by being able to use this wall in behind, we've now got a fantastic spread of passion fruit, and when they start to ripen, a lot of fruits that we get to either make into juice, eat fresh, and or figure out some way of processing, in addition to having plenty of extra that we can give to friends and family, as well as our employees also. Well, I can't not talk about the ornamental, seeing as most of our videos up until now have been about ornamental plants, and we do have small areas of ornamental plantings around our house, this being one of them, with reused kind of cement post holders effectively. We built this bit of a rockery several years back, again predominantly trying to use water-wise, drought-resistant plants in the landscaping. Ideally, we do not want to be putting much water during the dry season onto these kinds of areas. So as a result, we've been choosing succulent and or cacti for the effect, which is fantastic in the dry season when quite a few of them flower, but then also there's form and architecture to the plants, which is quite interesting. On top of that, then, we do plants in pots around the house, in the entrance, and in some of the areas that we tend to frequent and enjoy most often when we want to relax, rather than trying to landscape the whole property, which at almost 2.5 hectares would be a lot of water that we would be using to maintain that area. And in our idea, that water is best used for vegetable and fruit production at that time of year when we're not getting the water from the rain. So beyond that, the wider landscape is then planted up with indigenous plants, either that were already existing here on the farm or things that I have collected and grown specifically to plant. So this is what I generally refer to as the grassland wildflower garden. It is by no means a good representation of the grasslands here in Zambia. I've basically just let this area in the front grow and allowed the existing kapinga grass to effectively just grow to its normal height, and then interplanting in that area indigenous plants that hopefully will compete against it. So this is not a proper representation of grasslands within the country. This is just for me to get that effect of a bit of area of longer grass, which I can then be interspersing with indigenous grassland species if they can then compete with this grasses here. So this is the indigenous woodland area. Now, a lot of these are indigenous trees. They have been growing here for quite some time. They're all quite large. I have been actually losing some, and we've had to plant and replace others over the last several years. Now, this is originally Munga woodland, and Munga is a type of thorn woodland. It's usually dominated by things like acacia and combretum and terminalia, for which we do have all of those genera here on the farm. But it is also a woodland that is existing on fairly deep soils, and as a result we get very quick and fast growth of grasses and generally other weeds, things that we don't really want. That said, I have to try and select for indigenous plants that will be able to grow and outcompete those grasses, especially early on, and be able to then show up nicely in the undergrowth here. And you know, I have succeeded in some areas, I have failed in other areas. It's just a constant trial in terms of things that we can grow in this space. Beyond that, it is a lovely space to just relax and listen. You know, there's plenty of bird song. We have got one of the local francolins or quails that is constantly living in these areas. We've got the Senegalese kukul, which also hunts on the ground here amongst the taller grasses, looking for small amphibians and lizards and things like that. And then a plethora of much smaller birds that either nest in this area and or feed, or that just kind of pass through as well. So it's a very serene area, it's a lovely area, and it will be one that we continue to develop with more indigenous perennials as we collect and grow them. So here we are in the nursery area. This is where we grow both our exotic material as well as the indigenous material that we use around the farm. Right here specifically is an area of raised beds that I grow some of our indigenous materials to then evaluate for the competitiveness of it if I was to plant it out in the wildflower or grassland garden areas. Things like this Ancomanes deformis has done very well. It's produced very, very large shoots, so this should grow very, very well in the woodland area, and I look forward to incorporating it into that area. That said, from this clump here, which is now bulking up and providing me seed material to grow on, it will still take a number of years, as we have to first start growing them in trays with the seeds to get them through the first 1 or 2 years to a size that they can then be handled a little bit more conveniently, to the next 2 years after that, so 3 to 4 years from seed growth, in which case it will grow on in another area to bulk up that we can protect it a little bit more from weed growth and things like that, to then finally being able to be the size to plant out into the open garden, which might take 4 to 7 years depending on the plant. So sometimes it's a very slow process between collecting seed material and finally having material that I can actually plant out into the garden. But it is a whole process that I love to be part of and to watch and to see the seeds grow into little seedlings and then finally into mature plants that will add a little bit of enjoyment to an area, and in all fairness actually be a lot better for the local wildlife, which have evolved with the seeds or the plants. So both insect as well as animal and bird life are a lot more, they get a lot more benefit out of having our indigenous plants versus the exotics that we have brought into this country. All right, so that was a very brief introduction to the different areas that we have on the farm, and what we are trying to do here on this small little acreage of land. If it's something that you find interesting, please like and subscribe. We'll be doing a lot more of these kinds of videos and documenting how we take care of this farm over the course of the next year, and the challenges and the joys and everything that comes with running a small farm.